Saturday Night recounts the chaotic hour and a half before SNL's premiere, October 11th, 1975, showing how unprepared, ill-tempered, and just all-around unprofessional the cast, crew, and chief executives were. When I heard Jason Reitman was the one directing this, I thought about how his father was connected to so many of the iconic comedians portrayed in this story that it gave me hope he could portray this event funny and faithfully, and I might be a little biased because Jason made one of my all-time favorite movies, but needless to say, I was pretty excited. My best way of describing Saturday Night is it's the most intense hangout movie ever, for better and worse. Reitman writes and directs this in a way that's equal parts Aaron Sorkin, Robert Altman, and the Safdie brothers, whether characters are trying to rehearse a sketch, debating which ones to cut for time, or even arguing over whether the material's good to begin with. The production itself feels like its own character thanks to the following techniques. Long take tracking shots you'd see on a West Wing episode that move as fast as the characters talk, only to whip over once the next argument starts, and then back again. The overlapping dialogue that just instantly makes you feel so agitated that when there's a joke in between, you're forced to laugh as a defense mechanism. Handheld camera work shot from a distance or up close against the character's shoulders to make you feel like a fly on the wall, especially when Lorne Michaels is dealing with executives who could ruin his career at any moment. And Jon Batiste's percussion-based musical score all make you feel the high-stakes intensity these characters are going through as their careers hang on the line before they've even begun. Hell, even the title cards are funny yet uneasy at the same time, and they just tell you the time of night and how long it is before they're live. But obviously, the main reason to see Saturday Night is for the casting, whether they're an unknown or a celebrity, and it really amazed me how many unknowns were actually cast in the lead roles. Everyone looks and sounds the part to the point where it is just uncanny. Hell, it wasn't until after the credits that it hit me that Matthew Rhys was the one playing George Carlin, because he really nailed the Brooklyn accent. Or that Jim Henson and Andy Kaufman were played by the exact same person, and I mean, the makeup and prosthetics on him for both parts definitely helped, and gotta say, props to the makeup department for not even noticing, but he nailed the mannerisms of both people so well. But if there was a contest for best impression within the cast, it would hands down go to Cory Michael Smith as Chevy Chase. It is fucking scary how similar his face, speech, and mannerisms are to the real-life Chevy Chase. The post office announced today that it's going to issue a stamp commemorating prostitution in the United States. It's a 10-cent stamp, but if you want to lick it, it's a quarter. Dylan O'Brien as Dan Aykroyd was a weird casting choice at first, and not gonna lie, his first two scenes, I don't think he was even trying to do an impression, but eventually he settled into the role and absolutely nailed the Kingston accent. I'm from Canada. When I talked about this movie to my neighbors, that was the first thing they all asked me. And that millisecond line delivery that made Aykroyd so hilarious to watch. Gabriel LaBelle as Lorne Michaels was the biggest head-scratcher casting-wise because he's actually younger than I am. And when I did my research, Lorne Michaels was a year older than me when the show originally started. So it wasn't 100% convincing, but as the character you follow the most, as he's trying to create a unique variety show that hadn't been done before, as he tries to value the artistic merit over the profit, as he's battling over Dick Ebersol, played very well by Cooper Hoffman, or Willem Dafoe taking a generic evil executive and making him so intimidating in a way that Dafoe only could, and the fact that all the cast members and crew just cannot get along, cannot see eye to eye on artistic integrity. It's the reason you can really root for Lorne the most, because he has everything stacked up against him, but he's just plowing through it as best as he can. So as you can tell, this is a movie where the event itself is the main character as opposed to the people going through it, and I make the Aaron Sorkin comparison especially because most of the plot and character development comes from the cast and crew arguing over the creative process as opposed to actually seeing them perform or practice their process. And don't get me wrong, the drama between the cast and crew does get in some memorable bits. I especially love when Milton Berle visits the set and has an exchange with Chevy Chase. Oh, I remember when this guy used to do comedy. Funny, never heard of you. Must be the Alzheimer's. Or one of the writers, Bill O'Donoghue, played excellently by Tommy Dewey, expresses his incredibly dark sense of humor towards the people he hates most on set. You know, I would ask why people find George Carlin funny, but then I realized they don't. They just realize he feeds off the corpse of Lenny Bruce. And the more risque jokes that you could ironically tell in the 70s as opposed to nowadays were the jokes that got the biggest laughs out of me, as opposed to the more modern shit where characters just talk nonstop until someone shuts them up, or the conversation just ends in awkward silence. Why do people laugh at that? Can modern comedy, try for once? So if spot-on impressions of these legendary comedians is all you need in order to enjoy this movie, you'll have a good time, but if you need to see the skits that made them legendary to begin with, you're gonna be disappointed. And me personally, while the impressions and the behind-the-scenes drama was more than enough for me to say I was glad I saw it, I would have fucking loved this movie if every character had more than 5 minutes of screen time. I'm not kidding when I say this. Billy Crystal has more screen time than half of these characters, and he's just performing a skit that never made it to air. But seeing him perform it was a good thing, because you acknowledge how talented he was, you feel bad for him when it's cut for time, you see the tragedy in what a shit show of a production it was, and if there were more moments like that, where the comedian characters were allowed to express themselves, allowed to show why we watched them to begin with, that would have been awesome. But Dan Aykroyd, Gilda Radner, Jane Curtin, Lorraine Newman, Jim Henson, Andy Kaufman, George Carlin, some of the most iconic comedians of all time, are barely in this movie. They disappear into the background way too many fucking times, and because of the overlapping dialogue, half of their best bits just get drowned out. And ironically, most of the comedians that get more than one scene to themselves, in my opinion, are surprisingly done dirty, because 90% of their dialogue is just them complaining about why they're even here when they have no idea what's going on, without a good joke or a dramatic moment thrown into it. Jim Henson is a non-stop punching bag for how everyone thinks his puppetry is for kids, and I really hate how soft they make him in this when he would later go on to make adult-oriented puppetry. There's no self-awareness to that. Lamorne Morris as Garrett Morris could have and should have been awesome, but again, 90% of his lines are, I went to Juilliard, I've done operas, why the fuck am I here? That's it. But John Belushi, seeing this character put to absolute fucking waste in this was just shameful. His entire arc stems from that B skit that he was embarrassed to do on TV, and nothing else. An arc that was so inconsistent that when he threatens to quit, he goes out in public, New York City, wearing the costume that he was embarrassed to wear on live TV and doesn't give a shit. I don't think he's even in the same room as Dan Aykroyd, let alone has a conversation with him, which, talk about wasted opportunity there. And that's not even counting the overstuffed drama of Lorne Michaels' ex-wife, Roz Schuster, being involved with the show while going out with Aykroyd at the same time, and so many other subplots that I'm not even going to mention because they just felt meaningless, other than the fact that they really happened and that's why they're in the movie. And I get the feeling that because this movie is catering to the older generation that did grow up in the 70s and 80s that actually watched these episodes on air, Reitman just expects the audience to already know these facts and just appreciate the little tidbits that we get. But even though I'm not super well versed with the 70s and 80s SNL, I know who these comedians are. I know how hilarious they were in that era, but even I needed more context. And as for younger kids like me who didn't grow up with SNL but still appreciate these guys, wouldn't you want to appeal to an older and younger audience at the same time to really show what the era was like, what was different between SNL then and now? Wouldn't you want to acknowledge what got the party started and when the show was actually funny to begin with? You can tell behind the scenes tidbits that the older generation doesn't know, while still showing off the skits, the style of humor that made it such a zeitgeist to begin with, that the younger generation can go, wow, this is such a time capsule to watch, or at least that's the opportunity that I feel Reitman should have taken advantage of to begin with. And it does sound like I have more cons than pros, but the things that do work about this movie, like the funny yet intense atmosphere Jason Reitman creates, the tribute to the characters who are given moments to shine and really emphasize what these comedians had to go through in order to make it in the business, and the fact that you were able to actually portray this event as its own character, which is still a really hard thing to do, does make me glad I saw Saturday Night, and I would encourage you to watch it at least once if you're a diehard SNL fan. And with that, guys, thanks as always for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Saturday Night. What's your favorite SNL era or cast member? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on Patreon and buy me a coffee. And I'll see you all in the next review. Take care.